Sanibonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 309 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantumwa Kumalo. If you're joining us for the first time, you're tuned into the only daily property podcast in South Africa. Make sure that you go to our Facebook or our YouTube channel to catch up on all the great episodes that you have already missed out on. And to all our regular viewers, you know how we do it. Every single weekday, you and I have an appointment at 7 p.m. where we're always unpacking a hot property topic that helps us make better property decisions. Doesn't matter where in the property spectrum you currently are. You could be living at home and looking at ways, optimize your current home, and perhaps even looking at moving out of home, whether you want to rent or buy, looking at building. And of course, even if you are a landlord, it certainly is the podcast that can help you make better and certainly more strategic property decisions. And of course, we also have a whole host of other shows across Private Property's social media pages. You can tune into the First Time Home Buy show that comes to your screens every single Wednesdays, where Esther Clarkson is always in conversation with people who've not only walked that first time home buying journey, but have gone on to grow their property portfolios from strength to strength. And every Tuesdays and Thursdays, award-winning farmer Umbalimo brings you the Farming Podcast, which tackles all things agriculture. So if you've got green fingers or looking at, widening your portfolio and tapping into agriculture, then that is the show that you want to tune into. And every Mondays and Fridays, Chad brings us the Home Shoppers Show that takes us through different properties that you can find on www.privateproperty.co.za. And of course, those are the great shows you can look forward to every single weekday at 8. I want to apologize. I see that we're not having the greatest signal on my end, and that's why you're probably just seeing only my face. But this conversation this evening is one that I am not only excited about, but I think it's one of those that a lot of us, both owners and tenants, are grappling with. We're going to be looking at options for cash-strapped owners in the face of rates hikes. We've seen that at the beginning of this year, not this year, the beginning of the month, we certainly saw, rates hikes and municipalities releasing the increase in various tariffs from your electricity, your refuse removal, water and sanitation, and even, property rates. And this has been across different municipalities. And I think a lot of homeowners have certainly felt the pinch because some of them are already cash strapped, but tenants are also feeling it, because when we look at the cost of electricity, even when, of course, you put in prepaid meters, tenants are realizing that, the amount of electricity that they buy for 600 rands, for example, is not having the same number of units that they previously used to get. So we're all in this one together, from, homeowners, landlords, and tenants alike. and need to find different options to deal with the rising costs of property, home ownership, and of course even our utility costs. To help us best understand what we're currently facing and perhaps the different options that can be available for both homeowners as well as tenants. This evening I'm joined by Brad Allen, who's a sales director at Only Realty Group. Brad, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good evening.
Brad, I think one of the depressing things about July was definitely the tariff hikes. I remember when we're having the conversation in June, and we saw that from the 1st of July, we're going to get an increase. A lot of homeowners were saying, oh my, especially given how other costs of home ownership have also gone up. I think first, let's just look at what rising, the effects of the tariff increase on both sort of the homeowner as well as, of course, the tenant.
Yeah, so I mean, in our area, we had some valuations going up by 30%. And obviously, there were a lot of objections to that. I mean, my own personal property went up at least 25%, and I put an objection because I couldn't justify, and I'm in the market, so I know what the industry is doing, I know what my area is doing. And it does put homeowners under stress, especially with, it's not the only increased tariff. I mean, you've got basic water, you've got basic electricity. In our area, there's a minimum charge for electricity and water, whether you use it or not, a fixed charge. So it's close on 500 Rand just for water, even if a unit sits empty. So all those things put pressure both on the landlord or homeowner as well as tenants. And we've had a lot of complaints where tenants haven't been in their property for 3 months. They've moved back to, say, another province during COVID, and they're still getting hit with almost 1,000 Rand utilities due to basics, and they're not even there. So it definitely affects both property owner and tenants.
And when you talk about that minimum charge on whether it's water or electricity, actually making me think of how I wasn't aware that there were minimum charges. This is prior to me buying properties, and it just so happened that in one of the earlier purchases that I had, I bought into a complex where there's also a minimum charge, and you can imagine my shock. The first sort of month I got that levy statement and there's this amount, and I'm like, what do you even mean? I know that my water consumption doesn't anywhere near this. And only then did they explain that actuality, so it's not even from us in that particular property, and they still have to pay that particular amount. So I think it is one of those things that a lot of us prior to getting or buying a particular property were unaware of, and maybe it would have been a factor that we use in assessing whether to buy there or not, perhaps not. But I think it would have definitely helped had we known upfront that this is something that you're going to have to contend with if you buy there. Because 500 Rands, for example, for water, and I think now it's even gone up to something like 540, for water is quite a lot. I mean, if I compare it to another unit where a tenant lives full-time, the water charge gets billed, there hasn't been a charge that's more than 60 Rands per month for water. Right?
Yeah.
The highest was like 57 Rands. So you can almost assume a household of one consumes like 7 Rands worth of water. I think you wanted to add something there, Brad?
No, I was just saying it's a bitter pill to swallow when you haven't been at home and you still get the same bill, and we try to explain to, especially on the tenant side, they're renting a 6,500 Rand property and suddenly they're getting a 500 Rand water bill and they're not even there. And it does include 10,000 litres, whether you use it or not, but still. And it's not just complex, it's the whole municipal area that we in whether it's a studio or a 5-bedroom house, it's the same charge. So yeah, it's definitely a shock on anyone living in, whether it's a tenant or owner buying in, if they're not aware.
I want to find out from you at home. I think a lot of us are slowly feeling the pinch of the rising costs of home ownership. And even when you're renting, I think when you look at your electrical bill, whether it's your water bill, and of course the just rising costs of doing groceries, what have been some cost-cutting measures that you've been able to implement in your household? And I think for homeowners and even landlords in particular, what have you been able to put in place to also ease things for your tenant? Because as I was saying, I think tenants are also feeling the pinch. And some of them, as Brad points out, when you're renting a 6.5 bedroom, a 6,500 rands rather, apartment, paying 500 rands for water is quite significant, because in your head you might just look at it as, I could have just rented a 7,000 rand apartment, which would be far better than the 6.5 one. So as landlords, are there any measures that you've tried to put in place to ease these rising costs that your tenant is potentially going to incur? And Brad actually wants us to look at some suggestions for cost-cutting measures or saving measures that we can potentially think about as homeowners and even tenants.
It's quite difficult when there's a minimum charge, a municipal charge that you can't get around. What we've tried to do in big complexes, we've got a lot of units, is do things like turn down the hot water settings so that not as much electricity. That we've got timers on the geysers to try and save a bit of electricity there. You can use water saving shower heads on showers to try and save a bit of water. But it is difficult on the tenant side. On the landlord side, or as a property owner, it really depends. It's quite unique depending on the individual. But for example, if you had a 20-year bond, you could speak to the bank and try and extend that term to 30 years, which obviously in the long run, you're paying more interest. But from a cash flow point of view, if you're under pressure, it does help ease that cash flow in the short term. And then once you're in a stronger position, you can easily catch up, put in some lump sums. That's one option. Potentially, you could speak to the bank and try and negotiate a better interest rate. I mean, it'll be difficult now. It's not like 10 years ago where you could be more aggressive and get prime -2. But if you got a prime +2 interest rate when you took the bond and your credit's better, maybe you'd get a prime and you'd save 2%. So, I mean, that would be quite a significant saving on a home loan. But like I said, it's quite difficult to find any other things apart from utilities. On the landlord side, you'd probably find the landlords aren't increasing rates annually with escalation of 10%. I found that, you want a good tenant that pays and will keep the rent the same during these times. So it does ease a bit of the pressure. We always say to landlords, rather keep a good tenant than try to fight for another 200-300 rand, because it sits 1 month empty and you've lost that gain anyway. So, on my personal property, I've put in a solar system, which it's a capital upfront, but over the long term will save me all the increases on electricity. I don't get affected by load shedding and things like that. But, the saving will be there in 6 years' time. And I do find it monthly. It definitely helps. Yeah.
We are taking this evening your questions and comments as we explore options for cash-strapped owners in the face of the rates hike. I'm in conversation with Brian Allen, who's a sales director at Only Realty Group. I see some of the love that we're getting on our Facebook page from Glad Shirinda saying, Happy Friday, fam, Hoso Khumelo, as well as Yonela Zanga. I see you're tuned in. I see those green hearts that you're sending down here below. Umenzi Butelezi saying levies with the crying emoji. And I think levies is one of those pressure points that so many homeowners are feeling. And on the issue of levies, Menzi asks, what can cause levy hikes? I understand electricity, water, and rates, but 2,300 for levies. Please, can you explain? I love this topic. I love the topic of levies because it's one of those heavily contentious ones, and there are obviously different ways to always think through it. But Brad, what causes the levies to keep increasing?
So, I mean, you need to understand that levies are not just there for the body corporate to charge them. They cover things like security, your estate, if you live in an estate, the facility. So if there's a pool, a clubhouse, more importantly, it covers the insurance for the external of the building. It covers the maintenance of the external. So, if there's a property, for example, or a complex closer to the sea, there's going to be a lot more maintenance because the salt air eats everything. So you'll find the levies closer to the sea will be much higher than a complex that's further away from the sea. The only way to take control of that is to sit and be part of those body corporate meetings and actually have a say. Otherwise, be included in that conversation when it comes to budget. But a lot of the time, it's around maintenance. If maintenance is not upkept, then there's going to be a big bill in a couple of years' time because there's obviously going to be a lot more maintenance. And it's things like that and insurance, like I mentioned, and security are the biggest makeup of a levy. Often they'll include water into that levy. We try and keep it separate so that it's obviously clear and we can bill it to tenants. But I do see some complexes included as a flat fee in their levy account. Yeah.
Unfortunate things, because you've just even mentioned that you want to rather get involved and become a trustee, is a lot of homeowners tend to not want to do that. So they tend to be like, I don't have the time, except so many decisions get made by, the trustees, and unfortunately they affect them. I mean, I've heard so many people complain about it and say, look, we just keep getting increases in levies, and we're not understanding why. There's quite a number of us as owners who are feeling disgruntled. And yet when I ask them, well, why don't you stand for, being a trustee and actually get an intimate understanding of what's happening? If you think they're misusing the money, see where the money is actually going. And if the increases are justified, because you'll sometimes find that the increases are in fact justified. I mean, when we even look at the rise in costs of services getting provided and some of the, goods that will be needed, or some of the material that's needed to service your complex, you find that it's increasing. So it's such a big thing to be an active member of the body corporate when you're living in a sectional title community or an HOA, because at the very least, if you can't get the costs, in shape, you are able to get a good sense of why those costs keep rising so much. Now, Brad, I think one of the things I certainly want us to then look at is some of the rebate options that are on offer, because obviously in the various municipalities that we live in, even given the rate hikes that we've had, there are rebates for people who fall within different categories. Could you just take us through some of the rebate options that homeowners have access to?
When you say rebate, are you talking about first-time homeowners when they're getting over 100% financing to cover fees, that type of thing? Is that what you're asking? Sorry, I've lost you there.
No, so I'm talking about some of the being able to, get and even, pensioners, the cost of their property, how they're able to get rate relief. Sorry,
your internet coming through a bit slow there. Yeah.
Oh, I do apologize for that. I didn't realize that I was stuck. Apologies for that, Brad. I was saying that when I talk about the rebates, is the different options that homeowners and some, for example, pensioners who are still homeowners and are able to qualify for certain rebates from the different municipalities that they may be living in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on each area and each municipality is different. And, there will be rebates to certain demographic or certain age group, discounts that they need to take available. Guys that are under pressure, you can speak to the municipalities and get payment plans. I know that eThekwini municipality had a program or an offering where they said, listen, if you have a lot of debt, come to us, we'll write off the interest, we'll write off the penalties, but then you have to pay 50% of that outstanding debt. So there's always a program in each area depending on so you just got to sort of be aware and investigate. There's always a solution to try to take pressure off. Even with the banks, if you get into financial difficulty, you can approach the banks, and it's better to approach them earlier rather than later, because the sooner you start that conversation, the more willing they are to work with you. And the banks have programs. They don't want to repossess properties. I mean, I was involved in the repossessed, distressed, and SIE type properties for a long time. And, the last thing the bank wants to do is actually repossess, which means they actually have to buy it back, and then they have to secure it, and then they have to pay the levies and the rates and all the other things. So, they don't want to do that. So rather work with the municipality or the banks and take advantage of whatever they're willing to offer, which changes all the time. Unfortunately, it can be different this week, and each bank slightly different to the next as well.
And, talking about getting involved with the body corporate, or if you're in an HOA, we've got a follow-up question from Menzi. Menzi, I can already see there's certain episodes you've absolutely missed out on. So before I even ask this question, I'm going to say you need to watch a few of the episodes that we've done on, body corporates and how you can get involved in them. And the question that Menzi has for us is, how does one get involved in the body corporate and have a say?
Yeah, so obviously the body corporates have an AGM each year, and they vote on a new board and a chairman. You need to attend and nominate either yourself or get someone to nominate you and get voted on. And then, it's as simple as that. People vote you on, and you become a board member or a chairman, and you take control. And I think people will be quite surprised at the costs when it comes to budgeting for security and maintenance and, pool, garden, all these other things that we don't necessarily think about. And you realize how expensive things are. Or it's, no, listen, there's a 50 million rand surplus budget. Why do we need that? Let's rather keep levies the same, or, use it for something else. So I think by being involved, it will sort of give a much clearer picture on what the real situation is.
And I think one of the big things, and I even experienced it, Brad, was that when the first time I became a trustee, it was shortly after, I bought. And I think for me, it was wanting to get an understanding of what happens behind the scenes and what informs, decisions that are made that effectively affect my investment. And I think for me, it was also about wanting to play a very active role in my investment, because those were investment properties, and I didn't want to just leave it in the hands of other people when it comes to that property. It really did shock me how expensive it can be to run, we'll say, a community or an estate or a complex, and the various sort of line items that end up being paid on a month-to-month basis, and just how expensive it is. I think that for me gave me quite a shock. We tend to not understand why certain prices are high. And I think never mind ridiculously high, like 6,000 Rand, levies, but even in relatively basic, complexes, there's still quite a huge cost in maintaining that particular complex and making sure that all service providers are paid in time. I see some of the love we're getting on Facebook, or Tamzin Sokanyile. I also see Buhle Maduna. We've got a great question here coming through from Utlalekhani Maluleke, saying, how should one start negotiating for low interest rates after buying? I heard Brad say it's possible to ask for the bank to drop the rates. I love this question because I think a lot of us typically don't know that we're able to renegotiate the interest rates. I know there's one bank that doesn't do it at all. So even if you approach them, they don't do it, and it's standard practice for them. But with others, you're able to do so. How do we go about negotiating our interest rates? Right?
So there's a couple of ways. And again, because I'm in property every day, you sort of get more sort of accustomed to what you can and can't do. And I've done it myself where, I took out a home loan when I was young, and there is definitely, I don't think you can renegotiate if it's the first 2 years of the loan. I stand to be corrected, and it does depend on the bank. But you just approach them and say, I've been paying on time, I've got a good credit, you've given me a bad interest rate, I want a better interest rate. And they can say yes or no. And to be honest, if they say no, then you say, well, okay, I've got the option of switching my home loan to another bank. And then quite quickly, they might change their tune. So you've got to be quite aggressive. It's your investment, and 1 or 2% or even 0.5% is going to make a huge difference over a 20 or 30 year term. So, it's definitely an option. And if that bank that you mentioned isn't willing to negotiate, you can switch your home loan to another bank. Just make sure it's not in the first 2 years of that loan, because you might be penalized.
I suspect that particular bank probably thrives on either first people just not knowing, and in the event where they get approached, you factor in, bond cancellation figures, and then having to have it register the other side, and even the admin of it. I mean, I hate admin. So more often than not, any bond related admin tends to be quite a lot. I mean, a lot of paperwork, a lot of filling in. I hate that stuff. And so that would put me off. I think that part is probably more likely to put me off more than, paying for the switch. Because when you run your numbers, you realize that even when you pay for, those bond cancellation and the registration, the side, you might still be saving in the long run when you're able to get that reduction, especially if you're quoted quite a high interest rate when you got your property. And as Brad mentions, I think a lot of us, when we buy our properties young, maybe your interest rate, your credit score was not as high, and you hadn't built it up long enough. But now you're older, you're more mature, you've been paying everybody on time, and you're also just able to negotiate more. It's always great to kind of look back at what kind of credit obligations do you currently have, and can you renegotiate your interest rates across all of them, even with your credit card. I mean, I did this with my credit card because I was like, actually, first time I got this was nearly 10 years ago. I was so young. Surely by now I should be getting a better rate. There's no reason why I should be paying such a high interest rates. We've got a very cheeky comment here from Gatego saying, which bank doesn't allow us to negotiate once we're with them? We want to avoid them. And then she says, my current one just lowered mine again last month. I love that for you, Ngateko. I think share your tips on how you had yours renegotiated again. It's the again part that I actually love. So it wasn't the first time that she has done that. Now, Brad, I want us to close off with looking at people who are property investors and properties in their portfolio and obviously have self-managing or somebody else is managing it for them. I know that there are property investors who say, at the end of the day, I still want my money. This is the X amount of money that I want. And the tenant must deal with all the other costs that they're meant to deal with and aren't necessarily willing to meet a tenant halfway. We're not speaking about those. We're now speaking about the ones that absolutely want to meet a tenant halfway because they realize the service that they're providing to their tenant and that their tenant is a customer. And as you rightfully pointed out earlier, that you want to keep a good tenant. You'd rather maybe take a knock for 1 year or a few months in order for you to retain a good tenant, as opposed to fighting for that 200 or 300 rands. Any final tips for property investors who really want to do good by their tenants in the wake of us facing so many rising prices really in different aspects of our home ownership journey?
Yeah, I mean, and again, we deal with this every single day on the rental side of the business. And, it's easy, and I've got a portfolio of properties, and it's easy to get caught up in all, it's my property, it's my investment, and I want my money. And I don't care, that's what I want. But at the end of the day, you learn that if a property, like I mentioned earlier, sits empty for 1 or 2 months, you've lost any gain anyway. So, squabbling over 100 rand could, with a CPA, a tenant can cancel giving 20 days notice easily. And it happens, especially now, if someone's not happy. And an unhappy tenant is a non-paying tenant, which we find. So, you want to try to keep that relationship happy and a happy tenant. Obviously, it's got to be a happy landlord as well, because it works both ways. And it's quite difficult to get that relationship where it's a win-win for both. But if I can give any advice, is rather try and keep a happy tenant, which will be a paying tenant, for as many years as you can, because if you're using an agent to replace, obviously, their fees and things like that, and if you have a tenant that cancels, you've got lost rental. And then you're obviously not getting that return on your investment. So Yeah, just it's a bit of give and take. But again, it does go both ways. You find tenants also, you give the hand, they take your whole body, never mind the arm, and you get stubborn landlords. So both sides can be stubborn because we're dealing with humans, and we get caught up in the middle. But yeah, it's you just got to read each situation differently.
Yeah, and Brad, when you say we have it both ways, I was saying to you off air that one of the WhatsApp groups that I'm in is for landlords, and I think different landlords typically just sharing different tips, insights, and what have you. And some of them say, when they started off in their property investment journey and being a landlord, they we'll call it slightly softer, more understanding, and gave relative leeway for certain things when their tenants ask. Many, unfortunately, have taken advantage of that, where as a landlord, you thought, look, I want to be able to meet this person halfway. They're obviously going through a difficult time, and I'll do my bit to sort of help out. And as you've rightfully pointed out, unfortunately, because we're also dealing with humans, some people do tend to take advantage. And that's why the big thing as a landlord is, in the event where you're going, even as a tenant, this tip is actually for both parties, that have things in writing. So even when you are going to say, okay, rent can be delayed by a week or whatever the arrangement that you end up verbally getting into, have it in writing, have the person sign, and make sure that you keep that paper trail. It's not enough to just agree via the telephone and be like, I was a good person. You really do want to make sure that you're running it like a business and you're as professional as possible. Last one before I let go of Brad, coming back, sharing how she did it, how she got her bank to lower her interest rates again. She says, I just called and asked that they review it. They sent forms that I completed, and then they lowered by, I think she means by 0.5%. I'll ask them every year, second year, or whenever possible. And that's such a huge saving. I mean, when you actually just input that in any home loan calculator or model, if you've built your own model, you realize how much in interest you're able to save when you get that kind of reduction. And any reduction really certainly saves you quite a lot of money over the long term. Brad, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
And that is Brad Allen, who is the sales director at Only Realty Group, wrapping up the Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzaman Kumalo. We'll be back on your screens on Monday evening at 7 p.m. It is the weekend. I do hope that all of you at home are going to be staying home, staying warm, and certainly staying safe.
Hello and welcome to Home Shopper Show, and what a special month this month is going to be. We've just come back from touring the mother city and showing you some of the most opulent homes that Cape Town has to offer. Now, we started off in Constantia, there by the hotels, by the wine farms, touring a beautiful home that crested and overlooked all of the mountain ranges in Cape Town. From there, we shot across down to Bloberg and showed you what a seaside home looks like. We also went to Valderview, to the place where everybody likes to relax, enjoy the view, enjoy retirement. We showed you a home that I say its architecture only white is beaten by the decor of that home. We also went and toured the university town of Stellenbosch, which was incredible, Die Zalza estate, and then we came all the way back to the famous Camps Bay to show you what being a millionaire and living in Camps Bay in Cape Town feels and looks like. Guys, there's so much to show you. There was so much that we did and so much that we spoke about. So make sure you tune in every Monday and every Friday at 8 p.m. on Facebook, Private Property, The Home Shopper Show. See you there.